Hi everyone, Adam McIntosh here from WebSan, and in this session, we're going to give you an overview of migrating from Dynamics GP to Dynamics Business Central, which I know a lot of people out there in the GP community are evaluating. So in this session, we're going to cover a number of different topics. First, we're going to give you an overview of our diagnostic process, and that's how we determine how we're going to migrate you, cost, scope, all the different things. From there, we'll give you a breakdown of some of the costs and the implementation process, some of the things you can prepare or do ahead of time, as well as highlight some of the key differences between the two systems. So just before we get started, let's talk about why you really should be moving. The most obvious one is, quite frankly, that GP is coming to end of life. Regulatory updates and technical support from Microsoft is ending at the end of 2029. And even prior to that, some of the subscription licensing is ending as well. So that means literally Microsoft is going to stop supporting the software. Now, not that it's not going to stop working all of a sudden. It's just that there's not going to be any more patches or updates to the software. Depending on the environment you're in, if you have regulations within your industry, you might not be able to even remain on an unsupported piece of software. In the past, when I've held these sessions with folks, I talked about the benefits of moving to Dynamics Business Central. And we've got a number of different sessions here today talking about Business Central. So I'm not going to go into that in detail. What I will say is many SMBs are finding that they have limited IT resources internally that are even able to support an on-premise software. If your resources are already stretched, reinvesting or continuing to invest in an on-premise tool is likely not the best use of your funds or your time. We've also seen a lot of increased risk with on-premise systems over the last few years. We have clients ourselves that have been attacked by hackers or bad actors. And when that happens, there's a significant cost, there's significant downtime. So you got to be very careful about how your environment, your infrastructure is set up, and GP can face some issues if you're not following some best practices. And besides all that, ultimately it's an on-premise software. On-premise softwares don't offer the same opportunity for scaling or innovation. We've got a number of sessions here today, even a number that I'm speaking at about AI tools. I speak to some clients that are GB customers that are asking about AI. And quite frankly, solutions are a little bit more limited and less impactful, being that they're on-premise. So support's ending from Microsoft. I think it's pretty well known that the cloud offers some big advantages over on-premise. So definitely, if you haven't been looking yet, you should be looking at this point. So how do we go about migrating you? Well, the first step is what we call a diagnostic process. And that's where we will work with you to understand your business process flows, understand kind of where your business is today, and more importantly, where you envision your business moving in the future. So we start that process actually with a SQL assessment. So we run some diagnostics on your SQL database, your Dynamics GP SQL database. That gives us what you're using, some basic information with the size of the database, and there's a number of different other factors in there. But it'll tell us, quite frankly, kind of what you're doing. From there, we'll have a live conversation, generally kind of 90 minutes. It can be plus or minus a little bit. But we'll talk to you about your processes and again, specifically kind of some of your future processes or what you'd like to see. And from there, we can really give you a more detailed estimate of the work. And that'll break down exactly the scope that we're going to be implementing, the schedule, exact licenses you'll need, as well as some directional cost. Now I'm going to show you, or actually that'll give you a more detailed cost, quite frankly. We do execute these on a time materials basis, and I'll give you some directional costs in a moment. But one thing I like to encourage people to do in this diagnostic is really think about kind of where they want to move in the future, how they want to operate in the future, because this is ultimately your opportunity to make enhancements. We find a lot of folks, they struggle with finding the time, I'll say, just to make enhancements post go live. So, you want to get this migration right. So That's why we put a lot of effort up front into that diagnostic process. So what is this going to cost? Well, I've got some directional costing on the screen here, depending on your scope. We say these are estimated costs, and we will dive into more detailed costing through that diagnostic process. Just simply, honestly, due to, I'll say kind of market conditions and how things have kind of moved into the industry, we do execute these projects on a time and materials basis. So some people come below these costs, some people come above these costs. This is kind of your standard, though. And hopefully that gives people, understanding of the direction of kind of the effort that's involved with these. These are, at the end of the day, a migration to a new ERP, and there's a process, there's change management, there's training, there's learning on your side that needs to be invested in that. So you definitely want to keep that in mind from your side. That this is truly an ERP implementation, and to take it quite serious. Now, one thing I will say as well is the costing can be quite different. This is one of the major differences between the two systems, and I'll talk to some of the other major differences later on. But from an operating or an ongoing perspective, Business Central, you're generally just paying for user licenses. Now, here's the full user license here. Microsoft gives a discount if you are migrating from GP to BC. I believe that's changing from 40% to 30% in the near future. So I put the full price here, but just know that if you are migrating from GP to BC, you do get a discount on that for the first 3 years. Now, I bring this up because I've had GP customers I've talked to literally in the last month, where if they moved to Business Central, they would be saving money, a substantial amount of money, that literally would offset the price of the project. So with GP, they had a license renewal. And in this particular instance, they had the customization pack and the integration package as part of their GP renewal, which once you get those, you can't get rid of them. They were really down to kind of bare basic users. So they didn't really have a lot of users. They didn't even have a hosting infrastructure, so I didn't even include that in this comparison here. But they did have a number of third-party apps that, quite frankly, weren't actually needed once they moved to Business Central, because Business Central has that functionality. But if you've got some other hosting infrastructure requirements, that needs to be factored in. So I literally took what their yearly cost was of being on GP, paying that renewal, and they had to pay that renewal because they had to stay compliant due to their industry, and compared that to the cost of migrating to Business Central. The difference was about $7,800 per year. And that's Canadian dollars. This was a Canadian customer. But I talked to them and I said, hey, you multiply that over the next 4 years, which is what you're going to be, in theory, staying on Business Central for, because this customer really wasn't looking to move until 2029. I said, well, you've got 4 years of this, that's over $30,000 in savings if you just migrate to BC today. And it would have been a pretty small implementation. I said, you could migrate now, take those cost savings, and you're pretty much break even, but you're on a new system if you were to migrate now. So, you have to really look at what is the true cost of being on an on-premise system. There's a lot of hidden costs with maintenance, with your internal staff maintaining infrastructure. Microsoft has a lot of information on some of those hidden costs. I'm not going to go into detail about them now, but it's true. Like there's a lot of benefit to just having a one single user price for your user access and none of the other items that go around that. So definitely keep that in mind if you are a GP customer. Look at your renewal. Like seriously, look at your renewal. Let us work with you on what the pricing would be if you did migrate to Business Central, because I think what you'll often find is there is a savings, and Microsoft's priced it, appropriately, and they've given some discounts again, like I said, on that user license, and they've done so with the thought that hey, someone is going to do the math at some point, and it is going to be advantageous for them to migrate. So that said, what does the actual migration process look like? Well, this is kind of your out of the box process. Some people, if they have the larger system, larger scope, could be a bit longer. If you've got a smaller scope, could be a bit shorter as well. But for the most part, we're spending the first kind of, I'll say, 30%, 35% of that project preparing your system, doing some design, documenting that design for you. Once we have the design, we're going to work through what we call our test migration. So Microsoft has a tool. If you're not aware already, they've got a tool that will migrate your system from GP to BC. Now, it migrates particular or certain things, not everything. In this video, we're not going to go into the technical details of that. We typically are the ones that end up running that software, and we work with you through that design process for you to understand how that applies to your data and your processes. But we work through an iterative process to run that tool to migrate your data to Business Central, and we tend to run it over and over again, scripting out any issues or challenges that the tool might face. From there, you've got your system configured, and then we're training users on the system. They're testing the system. We're aiding with any additional data conversion, and at some point you're cutting over. So that whole back half of the project, you've got a working system, but really you've got to get your users accustomed to that new system. Now, as part of that process, we will ask that customers complete online training, or their staff complete online training. We give additional training if you need it, but it's by completing that online training that you'll have much better questions, much more contextualized questions, I should say, during any sort of live training. So keep in mind that that is kind of best practice at this point, and users should expect to have some sort of mix of online and live training. Now, I've got a phase 2 on here that talks about customizations, integrations, third parties. We definitely recommend that as a phase 2. Some people will swap that into a first phase. It obviously elongates that project a little bit more if you're adding on some third party items or some integrations. But if you want just your quick and simple migration from GP to BC, this is kind of your standard timeline on the screen here. So what can you do to prepare? Well, I've talked before at length about a number of different things you can do to prepare, and we've got some videos on our website. I'll cover off kind of 5 key ones. The first is really just setting your goals. Again, this is a new ERP, implementation. You should treat it as such. And within any process or any project where you're migrating or implementing a new software, you got to set goals. What does success really look like to you and to your team? And be open and transparent about those goals with us. So, because often you've got maybe some challenges within your current system, maybe some things that you're not doing the best or operating, with the most efficiency, and you want to change those about your system. Be open and honest about what those issues are. Second, this is ultimately a project, so you want to align your resources appropriately. Your staff are going to have to do some training. They're going to have to validate the system. They're going to have to get accustomed to that new system. You need to make sure they're available. So you don't want to schedule this at a time where maybe key resources are on vacation, or that your staff are busy with other tasks. Your staff ultimately have day jobs. Our day job is implementing software. So we're used to completing these projects. Our team is made available and assigned to these projects. Your team isn't necessarily accustomed to this. And like I said, they've got to kind of keep the lights on. So make sure you schedule your team appropriately and make sure they're available. You also want to set expectations about that team. This is going to take time. It's going to take resources away from the other things that they're doing. So make sure that they're aware of what's happening. Next, data cleansing. You're moving to a new ERP system. I mentioned this before, but this is your opportunity to kind of get it right. You want to start off any new ERP with clean data, with a clean system, clean reporting. That all bleeds into one another. So make sure you're taking the time to clean up the data. There is a tool within Dynamics GP called the PSTL, Professional Services Toolkit Library. You can access it by logging in as the system administrator. We definitely recommend using that tool to clean up some of the data. Our SQL query within our diagnostic process will also highlight areas where data can be cleansed and where you might have some challenges. So again, we can work with you on some of that, but if you're not familiar with the PSTL tool, or if you haven't seen the results of our diagnostic, definitely talk to us and we can help you with both of those. Last is not, but not least, is completing some training. Again, I mentioned we will assign some online training courses to staff such that they can bring forward more contextualized questions and have just more awareness about the system when they are getting fully trained live. So you should be able to set that expectation with the team. Now, keep in mind, again, this is a new ERP migration. You might have people that have been on GP for, or your staff that have been using GP for 10, 20, 30 years. Now, when they're moving to a new ERP system, they don't have that same level of expertise, and they might, have some feelings around that. So when everyone gets put on a new system, it kind of levels the playing field. Keep that in mind as you are communicating with your team, because quite frankly, that can happen. We've seen that happen. So there are some key differences between the system that I think are important to highlight. First is licensing. You're just paying that per user per month amount. Now, if you are using the manufacturing module, that amount changes a little bit. But in this case, that's really all it boils down to, is a per user per month license. With GP, you're paying a license renewal, buying the license up front. You might have additional customization or integration packs, and those have additional charges. If you are buying, say, a third-party product as well for Business Central, those tend to be on a per user or per month basis. Sometimes they're per tenant or per environment per month. But that's kind of the standard with software these days. So licensing is definitely different, but it is an all-in licensing option, I'll say. So you are just paying that one flat fee for access to the system. Second, the user interface definitely changes. As I mentioned, you might have some folks that have been on the system for quite a while. They're used to inputting data in a certain way or accessing the system or with a certain look and feel, and that's going to change. It is what it is. It's a more modern user interface. It's web-based. There's slight differences where it's automatically saving as opposed to having to click the save button. There's some terminology changes. For example, what was a class ID in GP becomes a posting group in Business Central. There's certain things like a recurring journal might be set up, whereas you might have recurring batches in the past. In Business Central, we have a concept of dimensions, whereas in GP, that was a segment in your chart of accounts. So some slight terminology differences, some interface differences, and I'll show you some sample screenshots here in a moment. Ultimately, what I mention to people is a journal entry is still a journal entry, an invoice is still an invoice. There's only so many ways you can input a purchase order, as an example. Best practice doesn't change. So the good news is that things will be simple once you get familiar with that user interface, but there is a bit of a learning curve within the look and the feel of the system. The integration with the Microsoft ecosystem is another big one. Natively, out of the box, Business Central integrates seamlessly with Word, Excel, all the rest of your M365 ecosystem. So it's your single sign-on login with your email address, as an example. Whereas GP didn't necessarily have that integration. GP was built on premise. It's been out and running well for a good 30 years, but that also means it's got some 30-year-old technology in it. Business Central's got that modern interface with Excel. So you can, for example, export data and edit it in Excel. It's got Word templates. It's got all the modern integrations with the rest of the ecosystem. I put on here it's scalable and modern as well. I know that sounds a little bit redundant, but I think it's important to highlight. Business Central is on the cloud. It's not going to require you to change infrastructure or to even set up infrastructure in the first place. So you can, as you grow, have your system grow with you. And the last one I like to highlight is the fact that Business Central does have routine updates. So every April and every October, Microsoft releases an update to Business Central. That gets scheduled with you, and you have an admin center where you can schedule when you want that update to occur. but it's available as of the 1st of April and the 1st of October, generally speaking. And that's all done online. There's not a need to have, downtime or your IT admin log in and adjust anything. So just keep in mind that there is routine updates, and you will be on the most modern version, or at least very, very close to it at all times. With GP, we've seen people fall behind on updates for literally over a decade because, quite frankly, they just didn't have that IT team, didn't have that expertise, and they didn't really see value in upgrading. Well, in Business Central, you're going to be kept up to date just from Microsoft themselves, and that's all included within the cost of your license. So let's look at a few sample screenshots. I mentioned before the user interface is a little bit different between the two. Here I've got just a simple journal entry. On the lower left here, I've got the Business Central screenshot. In the top right, I've got the Dynamics GP. Obviously, much different look and feel. It's the BC interface I should mention as well. You can kind of drag and drop and customize to your heart's content. GP a little bit more fixed in terms of the user interface. Here's your basic sales invoice. Again, different look and feel. One's web-based, one's more in a classic kind of like application interface. So I just wanted to kind of highlight those in a side-by-side manner. You'll also notice on the Business Central screenshot, there's some of the tabs have see more options. So you can expand or hide certain tabs to have more or less information depending on what is important to you. So I thought it was important to show the two of them side by side because different people will have, again, different comfort level with the different systems. So for those that are a little bit more comfortable with GP process flows, at least, we do have a migration assistant that does help with some of the terminology and some of those process flows in Business Central. So we help maintain some of the functionality that you might be used to. So for example, in GP, you used to be able to put in or just configure, I should say, user definable fields on certain windows. You can more easily batch transactions. You can view geo distributions kind of in a simpler fashion. We've bundled that into an app that users can download, use. There's a slight cost to it per month, but that helps maintain some of those process flows in the event that they are struggling with some of the Business Central process flows. That also has a couple additional options. One is your check remittances. There's some limits to kind of how big some of those check remittances can be or how they print out in Business Central. And the last one is the national account functionality, which is kind of a module or a feature unto itself where you have parent and child customers, and you can receive cash and do different transactions kind of at the two different levels, whether you want it to be to the parent or child. We've replicated that within our migration assistant as well. So something to check out and ask us about if you are struggling with a few of those kind of process flow changes. And last but not least, we do get asked quite a bit about, hey, what happens to my history? Well, that migration tool that I talked about at the start, it will bring your data from GP to Business Central. So you'll have those in dedicated historical tables in Business Central. Now, I will highlight that it doesn't support a few modules, mainly projects, service, and manufacturing. But it handles everything else, which for most folks is acceptable, especially from an audit perspective, because it tends to be a lot older data that's in some of these tables. I will say I do encourage people to get rid of some of their history. We've done migrations with folks where they're demanding 20 or 25 years of history in their Business Central system, data that, quite frankly, they haven't looked at in probably close to 20 years. The CRA and IRS are only going to require 7 years of history from you. I encourage people to get rid of anything that's over that 7-year mark, because again, you don't want to start in a new system with a bunch of clunky old data. Now, that tool only works on certain versions of GP, and you're going to have to be on version 2015 or greater. in order to use that tool. So if you're on an older version, we can help you with upgrading that version of GP to a more modern version in order to run the tool, assuming that is important to you. Some people say we don't need that, they don't move forward, and they just keep the data in GP, and that's acceptable as well. A lot of folks will just maintain that historical GP environment with one user just kind of on a server somewhere, just kind of in the back corner. They won't maintain their licensing on that. Some folks will maintain their licensing on that and move it to our environment, and we'll host it for them in case they just want to view some of the historical data. So there are different options there that if you do want to look at some of that historical data, we can help you with that. The migration tool does offer an option to move your historical GP data to an Azure data lake as well. We've not really seen a lot of users truly utilize that option. They typically are trying to get their data from GP to BC, or in the event that that's just too costly, or they don't, maybe they're just on such an older version that an upgrade is of GP to start the process is maybe just a little bit too much. They'll just, again, maintain that unlicensed GP system for that history. So thank you for staying with me to the end. I know that was a lot to take in. If you do have more questions, please reach out to us at info@websand.com or info@randgroup.com. Our teams would be happy to help answer any of these questions. I'm happy to help answer any questions as well. And you'll probably be put in touch with myself or a member of the team here if you are looking to migrate. We'd love to help you with a diagnostic, and that's generally speaking the best way and the first step of going about one of these migrations. So if you do reach out to us, don't be surprised if we ask to start that process. It's completely complimentary, but definitely helps both parties in the long run. So again, thanks for your time today, and hope to hear from some of you soon.